Um, well, great. Well, welcome to the first Be Better Club of this year, or this spring term as well. So the term, I'm gonna give a little tiny bit of an overview of what the plan is for the term, and then we'll get into the discussion. If folks had a chance to listen to the podcast, great. It's kind of an old one, but I don't know if you listen to Radio Lab, it's pretty awesome. So I really enjoy their shows. And I think it's a good baseline to set up the I think increasingly philosophical discussions to come. So basically, the idea or the topic for this term is thinking about the idea of altruism, right? So this idea that I keep saying idea, this situation where individuals are doing something for other people in a way that I mean, there's hairy work to be done around the definition, but in a way that seems to give up some of their own interests for the good of others. Sometimes altruism has a stricter definition where it means like particularly like selfless, such that you're not in some way benefiting from those actions. And so that's some of the philosophical or maybe even semantic puzzles around the term. Um, today's session is going to deal with this question in a very general sense. Like, where does this? I mean, the basic foundation of the podcast. Actually, I should ask: did y'all have a chance to listen to the podcast or no? Of course, it's fine if not.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you know the background, but for folks listening, the podcast is taking this evolutionary starting point. So where does altruistic behavior come from in animals and eventually in human beings? You know, what explains this? Because we have this idea of survival of the fittest that's supposed to be a competitive process, right? That seems not to make room for altruistic behavior. Um, as the term goes on, we're actually going to deal more generally with these questions of altruistic behavior in the sense of particular actions among human beings. And so there's these questions of like extreme cases where people like donate organs to folks they don't know, using that as a puzzle to explore this. But the basic question, if there's an overview, is altruism and like whether or not we have obligations or sort of duties to give in particular ways that might harm us or undermine our own interests. And so we'll have a discussion next time about the radical case of organ donation to strangers. We'll talk some about the effective altruism movement, which has this idea of like doing good for others in a well, they have a particular story there, but doing good for others in a general sense. We'll talk about some of the limits of philanthropy in general, maybe effective altruism included. So, is this something that has costs for democracy? Um, you know, not making a political statement here, but like there's all these donations politically right. We might sometimes think that the power of those who have the capacity to give can be something that's suspect. So we'll discuss that. And then we'll talk a little bit about foreign aid and stuff at the end, dealing with the questions of like what is the justification if we think there are arguments for giving aid to those in other countries or other nations? Is that a duty of justice or is there something like generosity? And then, well, in the podcast, I also consider whether it actually might be objectionable in some sense. So that's the big overview setup. And with that, I think we can get into the discussion of today's topic. As usual, I suppose I would start with: is there any thoughts or things that were interesting, either from the podcast that you're bringing to the discussion today that speak to either of you that you want to start our discussion with? I have some discussion questions, but
Nothing in particular for me. Curious, yeah, to hear. When I was listening to it, yeah, I feel like I left with more questions than conclusive
yeah,
thoughts. It was really fascinating, yeah.
what
Yeah,
do
and
we?
I would add that first of all, this is a really neat idea to explore over the course of a semester and through different lenses. So thanks for putting this together, Josh.
Thank you.
And um, as I was going through the podcast, from my background in ecology and biology, altruism does come up in some conversations quite often, and it always comes down to this idea of um, could something truly be defined as altruistic, even example after example after example. And it was interesting to see this come up in the examples that the podcast brought up, um, because I could see both sides. I could see someone saying, "Oh, that is a great story. The hero section that was really interesting, but none of them were altruistic because X, Y, Z," and uh,
Hmm.
just continuing that conversation. So the really similar to what Jason said about bringing up more questions. Um, it's just a really good conversation starter.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say this podcast and this probably discussion is going to be the discussion I think that's going to be most focused around like what do we mean by altruism? Is there a definition or a term that seems to like best speak to this idea? Right? Because it poses those questions I think you're talking about like, okay, well, I help somebody, I sacrifice my life, but like, did I do it because I felt like I had to, and then is it really altruistic? Like, so the definitional thing. I mean, some people can find this discussion trivial. Of course, I'm a philosopher, so I can get into these things. But like this is like the definitional question of like what would it mean to be altruistic, and then using that as a standard to see on the world. I think also, and I would love for you to give a little bit more about this, the biological story here, the evolutionary story here, right? Because I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but one of the questions, right, is this cooperative behavior somehow benefiting me, even in an evolutionary way, like passing on my genes? And then it seems right to take the wind out of the sails of the ultra altruisticness of the behavior, right? And so, but that sort of puzzle actually comes up even separate from the case of biology. There's these questions about. I mean, I'm talking too much. It's the first discussion I've led in a little while, so. So anyways, I'll pause there a second and see if either of you want to pick up on either of those things. But like talking about the definition of the term is a fine place to start today and think about, okay, what do we mean by that? And then to these cases.
Yeah. For me, I was annoyed about the maybe like hyper focus on survival and fittest in Darwin's theory. My understanding was that our interpretation of fittest also needs clarification. It doesn't necessarily mean like most fit, like strongest survive. It usually meant like most fit to survive in that environment.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when you think of it that way, most fit, like you are best suited for an environment, not
Hmm.
necessarily the strongest or the most of something. You could be, I don't know, the wisest or um uh so I think this is where altruism comes in, right? Humans are well suited to surviving on this planet all over, right? For some reason, even though we are not the strongest animals in the world, or I guess we're probably the most intelligent, I guess. I'd be curious to hear what you say about that. But my point being that, the podcast really focused on that fittest, and it was like, what would you do to risk your life? And I think it's more subtle than that. And so for me, that framing of suited for the environment, altruism doesn't seem to be a paradox or a contradiction. I
Hmm.
think you could be sacrificing some safety or something for the greater good, but realizing that when I scratch your back, you scratch mine in human cultures over time. And that there's like safety in numbers, for example, like we are inclined to congregate and to be social. So I think like socialness with and altruism are like hand in hand with one another. If we were all egotistical individuals um, only, I think our society would function a lot differently. Maybe we'd be more like psychopathic. I'm not sure, just doing whatever
Hmm.
we want without regard for others' safety or opinions of us. But we're not wired like that. For some reason, we do care about others' feelings and have empathy. And I don't think there was enough discussion about that in the podcast. And they were like, it's just crazy. People will risk their lives, or oh, the example about saving the sister versus the cousins. I think it could be subtly like maybe that was the one part that I felt like made the most sense to me. But yeah, I think definitions, like you say, are important. And I didn't like how they kind of narrowed altruism into this bucket of like self-sacrifice and like your um uh without more context about like what does fitness mean
Yeah.
per se. It's not
Yeah.
just surviving not surviving other creatures, I think.
Yeah. Ian, I mean, you're the resident here. I don't know if I think I have things to say, but they're not executed. So if you have anything, I would love for you to start. I mean, especially with the biological story here.
Well, I'm sure it's like anything. This is not exactly my expertise, but
Yeah.
so I'd be very curious what you have to say as well. But I think one thing that maybe Jason is poking at is that this definition of altruism, and the reciprocal altruism that you're alluding to, where like, yes, I'm going to do this for the greater good because hopefully the greater good will reciprocate this back. Um, Maybe we need to set up different definitions for altruism for humans and for non-humans. Given that we are aware of this idea of reciprocity and
Mhm.
the potential for it, but also getting back to survival of the fittest, we are aware of this idea of survival of the fittest. We are aware of the relatedness between a sister, a cousin, and a stranger, whereas maybe non-humans don't have the same awareness, and therefore altruism would have to look uh, at least defines differently.
Yeah. I mean, for me, yeah, the terms, it feels like it seems like there might be an analytically distinct and important term, like some sort of other regarding like helpfulness that has no effect on you. And that would be interesting to wonder if that exists in biology. And my hunch would be that it wouldn't, because it seems like it'd be hard to explain why it would exist, except as sort of residual or accidental. But it seems to me, right, like I kind of feel like I'm with Jason a little bit. When I was listening to this, I was sometimes like I couldn't understand that guy who like eventually killed himself. I mean, that's sad. But like I couldn't understand like what was the problem with the idea that it somehow benefited you? Like it feels to me there's actions that are merely self-centered, and then if actions benefit others and benefit me, that feels like that's great, and I don't find it particularly problematic. And I get how it might be something different than like I don't know, pure altruism in the sense of like helping others and not helping yourself or benefiting from it. But it feels to me like the concept that, and I'll be clear, like as this podcast as we move on, we're gonna shift to a little bit more of a generic concept. I feel like something like altruism that includes benefit to yourself, either that means like you have an interest, your reasons suggest this is the thing to do, and so that's why you do it. Okay, maybe that's not merely other regarding, but that doesn't seem like a problem. It seems like if you're doing things for other people and you somehow take their good seriously, that's altruistic enough for me, even if it somehow benefits you because I don't know, you like when other people are happy or you feel better when your friends or comrades or random strangers are not in pain. And I think sometimes the concept of like, oh, well, pure altruism has to be this thing that doesn't help anybody else. I mean, so it doesn't help you at all, and you have like no connection to it. I'm like, well, what would that concept do for us? Like, I get how it's a distinct thing, maybe, but um, yeah, I don't know. And the
Yeah,
thing,
I
yeah,
completely
jump in.
agree, Josh. That really hits the nail on the head for me about the pure altruism, exactly. And why did that guy who did all that research and who donated all of his money and food to everyone he could to kind of prove his equations wrong. Um, they kind of left out the reason, or what was the reason for his suicide. I wasn't, but and I think that's the motivation for today's meeting too. I think that was posed the question: does true altruism exist? I think it depends, like you said, what type of altruism are you talking about? Is there actually a need for pure altruism? And to that person, I think it was something Price, his name.
Mhm.
He couldn't imagine a world where when someone helps you, I believe, that wasn't in only your best interest. And that so imagine anytime someone does anything for you,
Yeah,
they're actually still doing something for themselves. How does that make you feel? For
right.
for him, it seemed like he could not live with that thought. It doesn't bother
Yeah,
me too much because I'm still getting help,
yeah,
and I guess like I understand deal making, or
right.
both parties wanting like win-win scenarios like are
Hmm.
okay. There doesn't need to be. It's not like a zero-sum game per se where um, I need absolute winning to happen on whatever the
Right.
scenario is that I may need help with. So um, yeah, I agree that maybe pure altruism cannot exist, but I don't think that matters, is I think the point.
Yeah.
Like practically speaking, and that we
Yeah.
can still live in a good and like moral world, even if people are self-interested. Um, because it's about like to me like ethics and being good and altruistic is about like not causing harm as well, and alleviating harm is the
Hmm.
focus for me. So if you gain from, for example, students that get volunteer hours
Hmm.
in high school, there's community service requirements. Some I know students do that just to meet the hours. Some enjoy the service they do. Some probably go above and beyond the minimum hours. Um, what is the net result? I think is the concept that matters. Like, did they actually do good and for others,
Mhm.
versus hurting them, let's say.
Mhm.
I think that's what really matters at the end. Not necessarily someone's intentions, but the net result.
Are you gonna jump in, Ian?
Yeah, actually, Jason said it pretty much right, perfectly, as I was going to say it at the end, is this, classic idea of intention versus consequences in philosophy. Um, that how, using the volunteers example, you can make different cases where someone truly doesn't need the volunteer hours and they're still doing it. How is that any different? Um, does that alter the intention, and lean more towards true altruism? I don't know. But the other thing that came up for me, going back to like the non-human aspect of altruism, and can pure altruism exist? I'm not sure if it can exist in the human case, given we know that there's always that potential for um, benefit or reciprocation down the line. But I think of, and I think this is where, um, at least in my field, classically, a lot of these conversations come up, is we try to assign descriptions to behaviors we see in the animal world. And sometimes we see a lizard jump on a snake that's eating a lizard, and you can say, okay, well, those two lizards must be related or something. But what about the case where those those relations are not very obvious, like a hippo saving a zebra from a crocodile? Surely the hippo doesn't benefit at all. Um, if pure altruism exists, unless the hippo is getting some sort of pleasure from that experience, I'm not sure. Maybe that's where it might exist.
Yeah, I'm gonna I in when I was preparing for this in the chat in my notes, I had this like I try to think about different ways we might understand altruism. Maybe this should say pure altruism. I'm not claiming this is exhaustive, but it feels like sorts of things we might mean is like altruism is there's like a benefit, and so it could benefit both of us. But maybe I only care about me, and so that maybe is like I don't know, if you think of market interactions where we do a trade, we're both looking out for ourselves, but both people benefit. Maybe that I'm saying, okay, that maybe doesn't seem like altruism. And then there's like maybe the benefits happening, but I actually do care about the other person. And I certainly think that for me, that seems like an important element relative to the first. Like I want my friends or lovers when they do something for me, I want them to actually care about me and not just be, I don't know, trying to manipulate me into loving them. I mean, it's a made up example, but like I do want it feels like there has to be some sense that I matter and not just me. And so maybe that's something that goes different in some of these biological explanations because it's supposed to somehow serve my interests. And whether it serves others' interests is an accident, right? Um, the thing that feels like the I can't remember now if it was Price or what the guy's name was. It seems like the thing that he wanted, or that it's really pure altruism. He seems to be something like maybe it benefits somebody else, or I'm saying benefits you, but I only care about you and I don't care about me, or like maybe it benefits you and I care about both of us, and so I'm bearing a cost. And the idea is that maybe in that I should have numbered these. The fourth case, I'm doing something for someone and I'm bearing a cost. Is that what altruism's demanding? Or is it just like I'm doing something for you and I'm only benefiting you? Because he seemed to have a problem with which me seemed like the important concept, that second one of like benefiting others and I'm caring about that others, but also maybe I'm caring about myself. Right. And so actually this is a little I was now I yapped so long that I lost the connection that I had for Ian's point here. Um yeah, I guess I'll just stop there because I'm off topic. But I was thinking these are ways I was trying to cut up what we could mean by altruism, and then I'm trying to think, okay, what is the thing that they're after when they're talking about pure altruism or something? Um, I don't know if anything I've just yapped made sense. Um, Ian, could you say your last thing because I feel like I had something that I wanted to connect to it. Could you just like try and
Yeah, sure. And I think I
tickle
see
my
what
brain?
I think I see where you're going with this. I think the last thing I started to talk about was in the animal world, for example,
Right.
how we try to assign these descriptions to behaviors we see. Um, and we assign animals that are related acting a certain way very differently than animals that are not related. And I gave an example of there's well documented situations where a hippo will uh, intervene when a crocodile is eating, say, a zebra.
Mhm.
And hippo is not related to the zebra. They cannot reproduce.
Mhm.
Um, So unless it's getting some sort of pleasure from beating up crocodiles, maybe that's where we'd have to look for examples of pure altruism, because we as humans can always see a potential benefit for ourselves, but maybe in the animal kingdom, that doesn't exist in some situations. Maybe.
Mhm. Yeah. I just
Even
like
in
shared.
your example, Ian, so well, just while it's on my thought, couldn't the hippo also be being territorial and that's still self-benefiting, right? The crocodile is in its territory, is trying to. I feel like I could still construe a self-interested example in that animal case, that instinct to.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. And don't get me wrong, like I agree with you that we could probably start to come up with even more reasons why it's not altruistic. Um, People highlight this hippo one though because hippos will go after zebras and other things in their territory because they're territorial, but there is also this weird documented case of them, you know, intervening when a crocodile tries to eat something. So, and hippos don't eat the other things. They just, like you said, they're territorial. So I don't, I don't know, but yes, we can assign um, these things, but I still, I think the bigger point I was trying to make was if pure altruism might exist, it probably exists in a situation where the individual acting altruistically is not aware of benefits,
Mhm.
which I know that brings up awareness and sentience and everything, but
Yeah.
complicated
Yeah.
stuff.
I think, and this you both said earlier, like it feels like the consequences relative to the intentions are important. And it feels like, well, one thing is if we're doing the consequences versus intentions, that clearly makes it harder to apply this case to the non-animal or non-human animal cases, right? So like what's going on there? Maybe there's intentions, but like presumably we can get to some level of animal where there's not, or we were not going to want to say there's intention. The amoebas, right? The amoebas seem to do this behavior. Just remember that. They're doing this behavior that seems to benefit other amoebas at their expense. And there, the intention stuff doesn't come up. And so then it's like, okay, well, then what? Yeah, what's the term meaning? Because I must admit, I feel like I actually normally I care about the consequences, but it feels like there is an important difference for me between cases where like I'm benefiting another person or a benefit to another person's happening merely by accident, side effect. You know, like maybe this hippo. I just hate crocodiles, and that's why I'm killing this crocodile. And I happen to save a zebra, but I didn't give a crap about it. I wouldn't want to say that assuming I had intention, was altruism, at least in this sense. Whereas like if like there's like some amount of weight that's happening from the interests of that other party that don't benefit me and that help motivate my action, like maybe it puts some water on my I don't know how scales work, put some weight on my scales. It feels like okay, something like that, like if some amount of the explanation for my behavior, in particular if I'm gonna judge someone morally, is they like happen to give weight to someone else's interests, whether or not they're suffering costs themselves, that seems to me to be something that's importantly different than like the mere accidental benefit, or even the mere like mutual benefit or mutual reciprocity that isn't couched in my caring about the other person. Um, because yeah. I had this language about it's from philosophy of economics stuff. There's some of these arguments much distant, but about capitalism and socialism. There's this moral argument for socialism that in the capitalist market relations, at least the motivation of the economic motivation is only my own self-interest. And so even though we might all benefit mutually, this guy Jerry Cohen says it's still a pretty poor way to relate to other human beings because we're not taking them seriously. And so he thinks even if socialism couldn't work, even about I mean, there's a lot more to say there, but he thinks there's something important going on with me giving weight to another party. And like so it feels like something like that's going on with altruism. Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm really circling it around a concept that I can't put my my fingers on. Um, and also I guess that concepts for future classes maybe or discussions maybe.
right. But
Uh,
yeah, you're saying that you're going in with the intention of helping another is different than accidentally or
yeah.
conveniently, right? When we like uh, go about the world, like living today, driving to work or holding a door open for someone else, like deciding to wait for a pedestrian crossing the street, is that altruism or is that self-interest because I don't want to go to prison for
Yeah.
hitting someone with my vehicle? Um, yeah, I think what's scary, I think, about all this is that you cannot know without asking. I mean, maybe people also don't know why they act. Was the
Yeah.
other thing from the video, right? All those heroes examples, they were just trying to like, why did you risk your life for that? And they're like, I just felt compelled. So, why does someone do something nice for another? Being instinctual versus like a intentional act, I think is also important. To differentiate here. And yes, I'd be curious, yeah, to kind of like elaborate on that point about how intentional one was acting versus just instinctually reacting. And where does that instinct, is that like our genes? Is that from just like over time being trained in some moral philosophy, whether that be religion or personal
Yeah.
experience, that just trains you to act that way? Um, And one of the examples on the podcast, that man that was awoken in the middle of the night and saw the car with drunk teenagers that was on fire, and he risked his life to take them all out of the vehicle.
Mhm.
He didn't think about his own death, it
Mhm.
seemed, and he said hoped he pictured his own daughter being there and hoped that someone would do that. So was that like a fatherly instinct to save
Mhm.
people? Um, I think that's what they were like trying to toe in the podcast, but
Mhm.
never maybe said out loud. Um, One man also the subway example, like kind of feeling like he was spared by God to do that. Um, Even that could, and I feel like in the moment have just felt like I don't know how much he was really thinking all of that
Yeah.
at the time versus he's been going about his life like feeling grateful to be alive and wondering why am I here still,
Mhm.
and it may have just clicked like because he's already primed to think that way in his mind. So I wonder if he even really made a choice. So yeah, I feel like Joshua, that's what I took away from your thoughts is the instinctuality versus the intentionality is really fascinating. So do you guys
Yeah.
think we are born with this like altruistic gene, or um, how does that develop and differentiate? And I know we all know people probably across the spectrum that um, act differently towards others.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to step on Ian's toes as the biologist. It felt to me a little bit like this, like survival of the fittest. Like, I think that's kind of an archaic conception of how evolution works. We all know that there's these like social animals and they benefit from each other work, blah, blah, blah. And so I feel like I even when I was younger, I used to read that there's this anarchist author who has this like idea about cooperation. Kropotkin had this mutual aid as like a factor in evolution. But the point what I'm trying to get at is it feels like there must be some social, I mean, sorry, biological origins for some of our altruistic behavior. And so I feel like if I was like that, I think I'm supposed to just call him Price. If I did think that was a problem, then I think that would be a problem. Like then I don't see how altruism could exist without there being some evolutionary support for this. Clearly, social creatures benefit from helping each other, and maybe that's what's explaining some of the hippos' behaviors, or accidentally their social behavior towards each other is overflowing towards other animals, right? Like we see cute babies, evolutionary advantage, we want to care for these cute things. Well, then we see other mammals that are also cute in similar ways, and so we think they're cute. Okay, like there does seem a connection there, and then I think for me, the question becomes, and this is getting back to what you're saying, Jason, like is how much how much would it matter if we had a lot of evolutionary wind behind us to be caring and altruistic towards people? Would that like undermine this thing? Or how much would it be a problem if he had this fatherly instinct to go out and save this individual? Because there's like, and now I'm drawing on my ethics experience. There's this idea in virtue ethics that if you develop certain character traits or virtues, that you don't have to ponder every instance what I should do to be right. You become a compassionate person, and so you behave compassionately. And it feels to me like, yeah, is it so much a problem? So now I'm gonna object to the thing I said earlier. Is it so much a problem if I'm not intentionally thinking I want to help this other person? If it's like in the back of my mind because of how I was raised, those values I've picked up or whatever, that I help people. I don't know, like, yeah, I guess I introduced two things and I should have kept them separate. One is how much of a problem would it be if there was like evolutionary support for us being altruistic? Would that like undermine how altruistic we think this behavior is? And the other was how much would it be a problem if like I don't know, are feeling grateful for being alive, or our fatherly instincts, or even the traits we developed as fathers, was leading us to take these actions. And for me, now I'm starting to confess, I guess I don't think doesn't need to be a conscious intention in that moment as much as like it feels like if there is some caring for other people. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just yapping. But I do feel I wonder how important that stuff is. Because Price clearly thought it was a problem. It seems like some of us were not so certain it's a problem, but yeah.
Yeah, and while it may not be a problem, it certainly changes how we judge people morally, right? If they're volunteering at a homeless shelter versus if they work at a homeless shelter, both are probably, good things.
Hmm.
But we view both of those acts differently. And then if the person volunteering is doing it to get hours and then they stop, um, because they got the required hours, then we view that differently than someone's doing it longer because they
Hmm.
don't need hours. So yeah, are they maybe none of those things are bad things, but it certainly is they are different somehow. And the car, the dad saving the kids from the car situation, um, that's interesting that we keep bringing that up. I interpret it slightly differently. I when he said that he pictured his daughter in there, what I thought was yes, he has the fatherly instinct, but he's also hoping probably that if it was his daughter in the car and
Hmm.
someone else's house, that they would do what he's about to do. And, he's hoping for someone in that position to act just as he acts. That
Hmm.
whole idea of reciprocal altruism.
Yeah. Are you thinking then that that would like undermine some of the altruisticness of the behavior because he's hoping that someone would do the same for him, or or his daughter, I should say?
I think it certainly is not within the true definition of altruism.
Yeah, yeah,
But do I personally judge that differently? Not necessarily.
yeah,
But yeah, I think it can't be pure altruism then if it is, if you're doing this with the hope that as a society someone is going to return the favor in some way.
yeah.
I
I
interpret
wonder.
that
Okay, go, Jason. Yeah.
I interpret that as when he said the reciprocation, like I hope someone would do that for me. I don't think he thought about that in that moment when he was, trying to save them. I think that was like a post-reflection personally. I don't think he was capable of in that time. Like I think when you're in emergency scenarios, you kind of go into your rat brain mode and you just like do things and less thinking, more doing if you're trained for that kind of stuff. Um, and so yeah, he didn't think about like his own risk of his life. For some reason, he felt compelled to help. So like he kind of pushed down the rationality and um I think letting those like natural instincts like come in. So I really do think like altruism is only rational because it has an evolutionary base for some reason. Would be my take. Like I think the podcast hosts were saying that. Why would anyone do that? Especially the example of jumping down on the subway track. There's a subway coming. Uh, that one really got to me. Uh, I could not believe that man did that. And like
Yeah.
left his daughters. I really don't think he was genuinely thinking with like higher order thinking. I think when
Mhm.
those scenarios too, when it becomes like life or death, um, you go into a different mode of operation. And I think just act more instinctually or how you were trained to respond to scenarios. Um, so yeah, I lost my point about the reciprocation part. Um, I don't think he was hoping for reciprocation, but that like I think we as creatures know it's like a net good to support other humans. Um, for some reason, we acknowledge this without knowing why, like at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends for me a little bit on, I guess, what we mean by rational. Do you mean just like rational as in my own interests, like this disinterested in other people's rationality? Because for me, in some sense, it seems it's easy. Well, I'm a utilitarian. I think pain is bad. I think pleasure is good. And so in some sense, it's easy to understand why one should help other people to me. because pain is good wherever or bad wherever it shows up, and pleasure is good wherever it shows up, and there might be other things like that. And I think for me, the hard thing is it does feel like, yeah, we have all these selfish instincts and stuff, and part of that comes from the biology, right? Whatever. But I feel like where is I going with this? I'm doing a really bad job of forgetting my train of thought today. I guess maybe because this topic has so many. Uh, Usually the things are a little bit more clearly in a philosophical
Yeah.
background that I
You're asking
know.
about like I use the word rational. Is
Yeah,
it? Yeah. So I was
yeah, but
thinking like that our evolutionary instincts and genes is
yeah,
like the reason why we
yeah,
behave like this. It makes the most
right,
sense to me because I
yeah,
think when we start thinking at a higher level than that, it doesn't the calculus doesn't make sense to me like
right,
about why someone would do these amazing heroic acts that they
yeah,
described. And I feel like just knowing how people react in emergencies, you just,
yeah,
I think, are thinking differently. Um,
right. Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I guess maybe here's a thing that I got, and I don't know if it was what I was starting with. It seems to me like evolution could be one reason for why we do certain things. It could be one explanation as well. But it feels like there's all sorts of sources of reason in the world. And like whether or not something, especially I think for most of us as human beings now, we often do things not because we think this is gonna help our genes pass along. I think probably that almost never comes to mind explicitly. Maybe, and I know some people will have like a sort of error theory that actually almost everything you're doing really is motivated by your biological drives or whatever. What I feel like is less important, period. But I don't feel like that'd be particularly important if it was motivated by my biological drives. If I got to this point where I saw that in the position I'm in now, not like maybe consciously, I happen to think other people matter or have this weight or blah blah blah. And this goes back to like, yeah, we force children to do service hours. And presumably when they're starting, they're doing it just because they're forced to do it. But I presume, and actually I imagine, right, one of the reasons we do this is because we're trying to, like everybody, we're trying to raise or habituate them into certain sort of behaviors. And so maybe they're not going to help at the soup kitchen when they're done with their hours, but they might have a sense that helping is something good and worthwhile to do. And then by the time that they're, I don't know, an adult and there's someone in harm's way in their front yard, whatever, like it makes it more likely that they're going to help because they've started to like think, well, helping is a thing, sort of thing I do. It's a normal thing. And it feels to me like whether or not that was originally there, if we were raised or we develop these traits or habits in a certain way, and this is where I guess the pure altruism thing, whatever it is, I'm not that concerned about. If I'm caring about other people and I'm doing things for other people, however I got there, in fact, however I got there is good, and it would be kind of weird to me if I was only doing it because I thought I had to help other people and other people mattered, and it wasn't benefiting me. It makes more sense. It feels like a more human existence to be like, yeah, I want to help other people, and I do help other people, and part of that is because that's the sort of person I am. I wouldn't feel comfortable if other people were suffering and I could do something about it, or I wouldn't feel comfortable if blah 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 blah. Yeah. Again, I guess I do accept the critics' view that does seem different than some sort of pure altruism where that must be helping other people without any benefit to coming to me. Um, yeah. Also, I'm happy to go longer because I started late, but if you have to leave at 1 because you'll have things, that's fine too.
Yeah, I will be hopping off in just a couple minutes, but
Yeah.
yeah, I like the way you summarized all that, Josh, and I think that um, you, especially at the end there, you said like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Like, it makes more sense. Like to be part of the human experience, we're going to have some benefit, and even if it is different than pure altruism, um, and I think I mentioned this before, that's even if it even exists.
Mhm. Yeah.
And whatever we can approach as humans, getting as close to that as possible is probably, at least for me, I'm happy with that.
Mhm. I mean, to be honest, if pure altruism is like doing things for other people and not considering my interests at all, that's almost something I'm a little uncomfortable with. I don't like. I think I keep going back to thinking about my friends or my partners. If I found out like the person I was in love with only cared about me and didn't care about them and we're doing everything, like it would be like, well, no, I want you to be enjoying my time and my presence as well. Like if this is a one-way thing, even if you're like, I'm not saying you're forced, but like it just doesn't seem like the thing. I want it to be reciprocal. I want existence in general to be reciprocal and beneficial in this way. And it feels like pure altruism insofar as I get the analytic importance of it. Okay, is there some consequence? But like, it just feels like something I actually wouldn't want in the world. It feels weird and strange. Like, yeah, I don't know.
I
And that's just
agree.
a feel.
I was gonna say that was my takeaway is we actually don't want to live in a world of pure altruism, uh,
Yeah.
counterintuitively, because what that means is people needlessly sacrificing or um, suffering needlessly, like possibly if you kind of subscribe to that,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the the motivation to live and to thrive and to survive, like together as a social group. I think you need to want to be a part of the group to help the group move forward. Um, so yeah, I think like we live our lives beyond just our individual selves. We live like in a context of some social group, like our nuclear
Mm-hmm.
family, our schools, our cities.
Mm-hmm.
Like our identities are beyond just our like individual human bodies that
Mm-hmm.
we're controlling. I think is kind of the point, and that when we um if we were to act completely truly altruistically, it would be a detriment to that other side of you, which is
Mm-hmm.
like your membership in some other body. Like
Mm-hmm.
if the father of if you were I have no kids, but if I did, right, and I acted only in their interest and to the point, it's kind of that thing like put your own mask on before helping your others, right? um if I perish, who's going to raise my children, like a sort of idea too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I kind of agree. I don't believe we want pure altruism, like in total. And yeah, we don't have enough time for it, but I would want to talk about like the relationship with Jesus Christ. Was that an act of pure altruism, sacrificing himself on the cross? And is that the only example of pure altruism? Like, has pure altruism ever happened? Is something interesting, and would we accept the story
Yeah.
of Christ, for example, or other? Um,
Well, he was just
and
doing it because we're his children. So it
you're
doesn't
right.
count.
There we go. He was like the good father helping the
Yeah.
children live. Yeah.
Um, cool. Well, honestly, I think that's a good Christian way to end this chat. I mean, but yeah, if you, I'm happy to stop there unless Ian, you have any last words you want to say? I don't know.
That's okay.
Well, so the next time is February 5th, and we'll talk about this case of people giving their organs to folks they don't know. And then this is really that's the first episode that's really going to get us into like I think a much more practical, uh, as practical as this discussions ever get discussion. Thank you all for coming, and sorry about the mess up with the link and not being here when it's just supposed to start. That's my mistake. Um, cool.
Yeah.
Have a good
Well,
one, y'all.
is it the link the one that's on the website correct for next
It
week?
should be. It should be. I'm gonna go back and check because that I got this email, but yeah, it should be that one. Because that's the one I sent to. Actually, I'm gonna stop the recording because it's still on.